Frank Fish studies how today's marine mammals swim. He looks for their evolutionary heritage in the way they move through the water.
The big question is, how do you go from a terrestrial mammal that ran around on all four legs to something such as a dolphin, which now doesn't have any legs at all and is well adapted to swimming in the oceans?
Even though whales look like fish, they don't swim like them. Fish swim by flexing their spines from side to side, like the shark. But mammals swim differently. This otter swims by undulating its spine up and down, in exactly the same way that whales do. And, as it turns out, in the same way that land mammals use their spines when running. Whales took with them into the water their ancestral way of moving, and we can still see it 50 million years later.
Okay, the other thing, the reason why I show the whale video now is because whales themselves have a vestigial structure of those remnants of legs. All whales have this pelvis, which doesn't have any use in their body, and attached to it is a femur for their leg, but they don't actually have legs. So the pelvis is a vestigial structure. This is also true on boa constrictors or snakes. Snakes actually have a bone that is a remnant of the leg that would be found in legged amphibians and reptiles from where they evolved from. The next structure that we're going to talk about is comparative embryology. So when you look at these embryos, this is what's formed inside of an egg as a baby is being developed, and each of the stages of an embryo all resemble each other up to a certain point. For example, you can see here the embryo of a fish, and then a chicken, and then a pig, and then a human. They all have very similar structures with very small differences between them. And here is a more detailed embryonic development of vertebrates. So you can see that as we get further away from the fish, the development tends to be similar until we take our next step away from the common ancestor. So we all share a very similar common ancestor, but as we break away from fish and amphibians, which is where the salamander and obviously the fish come from, the reptiles and the birds all branched off, and the mammals all branched off from the common ancestor together at the same time and deviated from amphibians. And so I'm going to talk about this branching in a few minutes. When we look at the molecular evidence, the DNA evidence from organisms, we're able to take a look at the DNA sequences from different species and look at the similarities and differences of the genes that are contained within those species. We use this to make something called a phylogenetic tree, which is basically what I was just mentioning, where we take a look at where the common ancestor is and where we or the organism might have branched off from its ancestor millions of years ago. Here's an example of that kind of tree. This is a tree that looks at the common ancestor and where things branched off in relationship to other things. So you can see at the top of the tree are the vertebrates, or the animals with backbones. And we branched off from all of these other organisms relatively recently in the span of time, where the further you get away from the base, the greater the span of time is for when they branched off from that common ancestor. This one is more specific, of course, to the branching off of the humans from their primate ancestors. So 13 million years ago, at the bottom of the graph, you can see that the orangutan branched off from all of the other types of primates and developed their unique differences over 13 million years. Then at 8 million years, we see another type of species, the gorilla, branch off from the rest of the other species to become gorillas. So gorillas formed about 8 million years ago. Whereas 6 million years ago, we have a common ancestor for us and the chimpanzee. And over 6 million years of time, the chimpanzee and the bonobo, branched off about just 3 million years ago. So we've been evolving for over 6 million years away from a chimpanzee. So yes, we're related, but for 6 million years, our DNA has had a huge chance to change. Here's a comparison of that DNA. So in the middle, you see a specific gene sequence on a human, and the dots on the left represent the differences between the DNA-based differences from the chicken versus the chimp. So a chimpanzee has less differences in its DNA than we share with a chicken, and that's because our DNA branched away from the chicken many, many more millions of years ago, and so therefore the DNA of a chicken has had a lot more time to have changes in the sequence of DNA from our own. Whereas because we branched off from a chimpanzee, that sequence of DNA has branched off relatively more recently, so therefore has less changes in the DNA. So in this particular video, I'm not going to show it here. It's a great review for you to watch on your own. So you would just need to open up the Google Slides that I've posted on Google Classroom, and you can watch this to review at your leisure. So that ends our notes. Please make sure that you understand that this is meant to be your notes about what the evidence of evolution contains. Thank you. See you next week.